Sick. All right. Welcome to the podcast. Excited to chat about what you guys are doing. Like I was saying a second ago, I just read the white paper and it sounds interesting, and I got a lot of questions about it. Maybe to start, Landry and Michael, you can introduce yourself and talk about what you do and what you want to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. My name is Landry Bowles. I am a PhD student at Dartmouth College in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. I work with Mark Thornton in our lab called the SCRAP Lab, which is the Social Computation, Representation, and Prediction Lab, which is kind of a mouthful. We study predictive social cognition. So we study how people interact and understand each other through the lens of prediction. And my research specifically focuses on complicated social environments like group conversations. So I study specifically naturalistic social cognition, where naturalistic means like face-to-face, real-world social interactions, whereas non-naturalistic might be you like read a vignette about some situation and then make some judgments about the people described in said situation. So my research involves recording people in group conversations and then using those recordings to extract a bunch of information about the conversation itself. And so right now I'm working on understanding how people segment their experiences during social interactions like that, and how the signals that they emit during those social interactions index their internal cognitive processes when they're trying to understand each other. And yeah, so that's my nutshell, I suppose. Michael?
Yeah, my name's Michael Schnebly. I'm a PhD student in applied physics at Harvard University in Duca Hexter's lab, where we study protein mechanics, which is essentially how nature's tiniest machines work. There are many different kinds of proteins, all of which perform unique and important functions extremely reliably at the molecular level. And we'd like to understand how nature has designed these machines through evolution. And in addition to that, I have an artist project titled Stepwise, where I explored using various kinds of body tracking technology to wield light and sound in live performance settings. And that leads to some overlap here with Landry, who uses body tracking technology for his own research of social situations. Yeah.
Nice. How did you guys all, well, I guess I have questions about all of this stuff already, but in the interest of just like kind of getting to the point, I was sent a white paper before this podcast, which talks about sort of using these different, body tracking technologies and whatever sensors and stuff to look at crowds and extract a bunch of data from those crowds to, gain information and maybe feed that data into an AI model and have it come up with some observations and whatnot. Can you explain more about this project?
Yeah. So I guess like ultimately how this started was in the last 5 years, my music project Supertask, I've kind of like explored how to incorporate the crowd into the experience more. Like I feel like so many shows are just a DJ or a producer going up and doing their thing in front of an audience, and then that's it. I want to involve the audience a little bit more. So I've done things in the past similar to this in the same vein, where it's like a choose your own adventure kind of situation. The crowd is voting to participate and control the narrative of the show. This show was kind of focused more around the concept of bridging art and science. And so the way that I kind of came up with this, at least the way that we all met and interacted, was I had the idea to ultimately use the sample size of like an audience for psychological research. I think there was like a unique opportunity there. I proposed this idea to Michael, who connected us with Landry, and then we started just brainstorming what we could pull off. And that got us to the first kind of iteration of this show called Calibration, which will happen in about a week, but it will actually be already played out by the time that this taping goes public. So we might even have like some findings by the time this podcast is released.
So what is the goal? Like, what is the end goal with this calibration project?
So I don't think we know yet. I think we're gonna get so much knowledge from this trial run here, and I think we're kind of in a lot of ways like breaking new ground and new territory in a live environment. And so one thing that I was just curious about in general is just studying or seeing more into the dynamics of crowds. Like from a DJ perspective, for example, you could play a song and have it not work in a certain room, but it works in another room. And so I'm really interested in that, of like what has to come together to make people have the best experience possible. And so perhaps like an end result of this, at least from my side, is an optimized performance.
And how do you think you can tell what is optimized? Because sometimes when you might play a song and nobody moves and everybody's still, they might be having an amazing time in their head, but it's hard to tell because they are not like outwardly expressing themselves. And so it seems like if you're tracking people with cameras and sensors and whatnot, like mainly the only thing you could measure is how outwardly how much they're outwardly expressing themselves and not really tapping into their subjective internal experience. And I think the result you would come to, I assume, is just that dubstep is the best.
Yeah, we'll also be offering Neuralink installations at doors.
Nice.
But totally right that you can only tell so much about someone's experience from their physical like movement or stature during a show.
Yeah, I can comment a bit on that, on the psychological perspective. One of the things we're planning on doing during the show is kind of this stochastic experience sampling. And experience sampling, often called something like emotion momentary assessment in psychology, is periodically pinging people with a short survey as they're going about daily life and just asking them, like, how are you feeling? What are you experiencing right now? And so kind of one of the short-term goals for me is to try and understand how we might be able to use some of the more subtle information. Like you're saying, if we're just using like net body motion in a crowd, the conclusion might be that dubstep is the best. Like, yes, absolutely. But technology, specifically like computer vision techniques, have gotten so good in recent years and recent months that we're only just beginning to leverage the information that they can extract from something like live video feeds to understand people's internal subjective experience. So, one of the things we'll be doing at the show, and, Michael's responsible for the entire like technical setup, is recording the crowd using a bunch of these high quality infrared cameras, and then using those cameras or those feeds to extract information from those videos. So facial expressions, body language, and then derivative statistics from those, like how chaotic people's motions are, the average emotional expression on their faces. So because we have that data in parallel with this stochastic pinging that people are going to get on their phones, asking how they're feeling, one of the things we might be able to do is understand the relationship between these crowd level statistics and relate those back to people's internal subjective experiences. And that remains to be seen, how well we can actually get a model to fit to accurately predict that sort of thing. But I think, I can't emphasize enough just how good so many of these computer vision models have become. And I personally am optimistic that we can actually get pretty good readouts about how people are feeling just based on watching them in this way.
So you're going to have infrared cameras watching the crowd, plus like people's phones will be pinged asking them questions during the performance. Is that correct? Yeah. And yep. What kind of data can you get from the infrared cameras?
Well, first of all, I guess I'd say why infrared?
Right. That's a good question.
So I actually have one here, right? And so I know that this is primarily for those who are just listening. We have a mount that I'm holding in my hand that's connected to a small FLIR camera. which is a monochrome camera that can see in infrared wavelengths. And at the end, the FLIR camera is about the size of, I don't know, half the size of your fist. And at the end of its lens, there's a filter that only allows infrared wavelengths of light through. That is, like wavelengths of light that are longer than what we can see typically as humans. But what's useful about recording in those wavelengths is that concert lighting is typically only in the visible spectrum, right? And if you want to track body movements at a show, it's ideal to have consistent lighting for the tracking conditions, for the tracking algorithm in the computer. And there's a lot of strobes and lasers and LED wall light patterns playing over the crowd, causing it to be extremely variable. But if you use something like infrared, then you can consistently light the scene with, say, this lamp that's attached to the top of the camera. And since you're filtering for infrared wavelengths of light, the only thing that will be visible is this consistently lit scene, even when there are strobes and lasers and other things happening mid-show. And the kind of information, to answer your question, Bill, that can be collected with infrared cameras is essentially the same as if you were pointing a regular camera at the crowd. It's just that with this kind of setup, you get a lighting invariant recording.
Interesting. And are those lamps on top of the camera visible to the human eye?
Just barely. When it turns out, there's a little bit of bleed through, but most of the light that's being projected, you can't see. So it's kind of similar to a security camera or surveillance system in that way.
Interesting. So I still have the question of like, what kind of data do you get from filming people? Like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for like how much they move their arms, or like how much they look over to the person next to them, or?
So this event primarily is like to calibrate this technology. So what's going to happen is there's a video recording ultimately of an actor asking the crowd to stand like perfectly still, and then which they can elaborate on through certain techniques like pose estimation, things like this. We'll get ground truth on what still people look like in the crowd, and then we ask them to make certain facial expressions, things like that. So there's like a series of calibrations that occur 4 times per night. That just give us more information that they can unpack. But
Wait, so 4 times during the event, you're going to ask people to stand still?
So there's like a set change in between each act, and during that set change, there's like a calibration procedure.
Oh, right. And so what, you'll just get on the mic or something and be like, hey, everyone do this or do that?
It's just an actor reading a predetermined script. So we know that it's consistent each time. The time code is like identical for each experience. So we can just get many like iterations of recording this data.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And that's just, you're just going to like play that through the LED wall in the sound system, basically?
Correct.
Oh, that's cool. Sorry, you're going to say something?
And that's essentially to collect controlled training data for the body tracking models that we're going to be using to analyze crowd motion. And Landry can speak more to how that data, like the different patterns that we like to analyze and extract from body movement data during the show. But just to speak real quickly to the calibration sessions, the idea is that we want to direct the crowd through a range of poses that we expect them to be in a controlled circumstance, which will then help us like calibrate the tracking models in the uncontrolled circumstance of people just moving around and enjoying the show.
How do you account for the fact that some people might just be like, fuck that, and start doing all sorts of shit when they're supposed to be doing the calibration thing?
Yeah, there will be some manual tuning of say like outliers, I would call them.
Just crop them out or something, or
yeah, essentially
mask them out or something.
Well, I mean, I'll say that we actually don't want from my perspective, we don't want the crowd to be like perfectly following everything we're doing or asking them to do at all times, because like crowds by their nature are pretty like noisy things. And if, one of our goals is to train models or deep neural networks to detect different crowd states, then we need them to be robust to these imperfections. And so we actually wouldn't want everybody in the crowd all the time to be behaving exactly like they are, or we ask them to, because then, the model would be incredibly imperfect at detecting, real world crowd behavior. So for example, if we ask everybody in the crowd to smile or frown at the same time, which we are going to ask them to do, then if there's ever a moment during the show in which people actually are intrinsically smiling together, or at least the majority of them are, then we want the model to be able to see that and understand that without having to rely on its observations being, completely perfect. So, that's kind of like the beauty of deep learning, deep neural networks in our case, is that they can be super robust to all of the random variations of crowd assemblies that might happen at shows. There's going to be different people, different spatial configurations, different densities of the crowd. People are going to be wearing different things. There's different energy in the music. And so that's kind of one of our goals here, is to sample widely. That's why we're collecting the data throughout the night as people are kind of filtering in, to be robust to different contexts, so that we can use this going forward.
Yeah, it makes sense. And where do you plan to set the cameras up, and how many cameras do you plan to have?
Yeah, it's a 12 camera system, a dodecacam, if you will. And they're going to be mounted in a regular grid over, on top of the audience, looking down on the audience.
Nice. Do you worry about, well, actually, I have another question about the surveys. Do people just have to download this app or something on their phone before they come in, or how are you going to do that?
So the mechanism is it's ultimately something I've used in the past. It's what I just called a key card. It is a piece of plastic with 2 QR codes on either side. And so there's going to be a survey for the people that have obtained those and a survey for people that have not obtained those. And they interact with the key card by scanning the QR code in order to complete the survey at certain moments during the show.
Wait, one side of the key card is for people who have obtained the key card, and the other side is for people who haven't?
Correct. So there's
how
control.
Are the people, if they don't have the key card, how are they going to access the other side of the key card?
They're asked to locate someone with one and scan it.
Yeah, that would make sense. So the infrared camera, actually, if you look at the recording, it looks like people. It doesn't look like just infrared wavelengths.
Yeah, it just looks like a monochrome video. It just looks like a black and white video is being taken of the scene. It's not like heat vision like in Alien Predator. It just looks like a black and white video.
Okay. And what do you plan to do with this data? What kind of machine learning models do you plan to feed it into?
Yeah, I'll say that. So your question was about the types of models that we're planning to train. I can't answer directly to the different types of architectures that we might use, but I can say that ultimately we're going to be working with time series data. And so the crowd's movements, their behaviors, their facial expressions, all of those things are time varying. You might be able to understand a lot by looking at snapshots. Say, okay, I have one picture of the crowd at this moment in time. I can probably make some observations, make some inferences about the energy level, about how everybody's feeling over time. But I think one of the things that I and we are really interested in is how crowds evolve over the course of the night. And so by the fact that, so that makes it the fact that we're working with time series data. So, and that lends itself to working with different neural network architectures, some better than others. But I can also talk about, one of the things we're trying to understand is the relationship between environmental factors and crowd states. We're not just studying the crowd in isolation. Maybe that is one of the things we want to do. We want to study the natural statistics of a group of people in a room over the course of a night. but we also want to understand the relationship between the crowd's collective energy, the entropy, those sorts of things with the light and sound of the environment that they're in. And so this includes, what are the harmonics that of the music that the performer is working with? What are, are we working with more cool colors versus warmer colors on stage? Is there more chaotic flashing lights happening? And so, one very simple way to say, say this is we want to be able to predict crowd behavior based on environmental factors. And so that's the input-output situation. Can we predict a crowd's collective evolution over the course of a show before it actually happens based on what we know the crowd is observing themselves?
So, yeah, from my very limited experience with AI stuff, you basically, to train a model, need to go here's a thing and here's what that thing is supposed to be. And then give it a bunch of that in big ass vector number array thingies. I'm so curious as to how you plan to turn this video into a giant vector number array, and what kind of features you plan to break down into those different numerical spaces.
Yeah, so I can tell you about what I'm doing in my work and how I plan to extend that to this crowd setting. A lot of the stuff that I do already in my research can be scaled up. So in my research, I'm studying the multimodal dynamics of group conversations. Multimodal meaning there are multiple different modalities through which we communicate with each other. In my research, there's 4 modalities, one of which is dynamic body movements and gestures. Another is facial expressions. Another is the acoustics of my voice, so how I'm saying things. And then there's also what I'm saying. So we're getting the semantic content of people's speech too. And so the way you get all of those things is you use a bunch of what's called pre-trained models or pre-trained deep neural networks. And so for each of those modalities, someone has spent their entire PhD working on training a neural network that can extract 3D body poses from 2D video. And so what we get to do is take these tools that other people have made and put them all together so that we can get this very high quality, high fidelity representation of people's expressions over time. And then, so our job then is to kind of funnel all that information together and then start fusing it using our own models. So you can kind of think of each of those different pre-trained models as a different type of microscope or what's the thing that measures the movement of the tectonic plates? Different, just recording devices to study different things. And so our job is to kind of fuse them. So that's how we would arrive at this. You can imagine, a very high dimensional time series, which just means, rather than video frames, which might be represented as 1,000 pixels at 30 frames per second, we have, however many thousand features, where one feature might be, this person's facial expression on one side of their face, or another feature might be where they're looking, or another feature might be the, angle of their elbow from the side of their body. So we have all that information varying over time, and then we can use downstream deep neural networks to understand the statistical structure of all of that data as it coalesces together.
Yeah, that's going to be a big ass data set. I've tried doing this stuff with audio, which is a way smaller problem space, I would think, than a crowd and video. And yeah, it's insane trying to extract features even from audio, trying to get the spectral crest and the spectral kurtosis and the flatness and all this shit and represent it as numbers, and then create another set of numbers and be these numbers are supposed to look like these. And I just don't even see how it's possible with video to get that many features out. It seems like a big ass data job.
I can say that one of the nice things about video that's a little bit easier than audio is video, you can very easily visualize your outputs, whereas audio, it's much harder to understand. So if I'm extracting some audio feature from somebody's voice over time, I would have to look at a moving timeline as I'm listening to the audio and seeing that feature being plot as it moves up and down on the y-axis. Whereas if I'm extracting like something like facial features or body poses, then I can literally just plot the points on top of the 2D video to see how well it's doing. But that's much, much more difficult and much less interpretable than something like an audio. Like there are a ton of different audio features that don't have clear perceptual analogs. You know, like I couldn't tell you, like you're saying, it's some sort of crest. Like it's much harder to explain how that ends up playing out perceptually than something like how quickly somebody is moving or something, or brightness, for example.
Right. How did you guys come up with this idea in the first place? Like, what was the moment where you're like, oh yeah, I want to look at crowds and extract data from that, and then try and come up with some theories as to like what works in music and stuff? Whose idea was it, and like what was the precursor to thinking about all this stuff?
You know, I think we've each had this idea independently at some point in our past, which creates some really solid group synergy here. Myself, I set up camera arrays in 360 around my body to track body movements, because I wanted to control the lights on, at the time, this geodesic dome.
This is Michael's dome era.
The dome era.
Michael, when I met Michael, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Michael built a giant dome in the backyard when we were roommates, and this was like my first impression of him.
When I was living under Landry's staircase. And I wanted to control the lights on this dome, right? And as we got more people inside of it, you know, we started to wonder, and like we'd play music and stuff while we were in there, and we started to wonder, like, what kind of things one could do with that data, this tracking of people in this environment while they're all like jamming out to music. And Landry has his own path, I suppose, which was in part that, since we were living together. But
yeah. I will say that, Michael has been an inspiration in terms of like being able to make these things like actually technically feasible. Whereas for, like I've always been really interested in people watching and understanding groups for a long time. And then I met Michael and he's like setting up all these cameras. Like, look, I have this perfect pose estimate from my dome. But in terms of like how I specifically became interested in these things, I think that, it's so hard. There's a huge cluster of influences. The most I can say is that I've always just really liked people watching. And one of the things that has always fascinated me is people's ability to immerse themselves in something as complicated as something like a group conversation as a crowd and not be totally overwhelmed all the time. And from my perspective, that's one of the most interesting things our brains can do. Is very quickly be able to perceive multiple people around me that I understand to have unique minds and rapidly arrive at a neural representation or a mental understanding of what is happening now, who's talking to who, what are their attitudes, what are we working towards. And so kind of like one of my high level research goals is trying to understand how the brain performs that aggregation and uses that information to contextualize individual behavior. Because as humans, one of the most amazing things we do and kind of like our defining feature is our sociality, is we work together to build skyscrapers, to run governments, to make art, to run the world together. And so we actually know surprisingly little about the computations that are required to make that happen. And so going back to the idea of how we use that information to guide contextually informed behavior for ourselves is, I'm interested in, how do I use that information to understand myself? If I'm in a crowd, if I'm, at dinner with my family, if I'm, in a classroom full of other people, how is, my understanding of where I am relative to all these other people shaping my understanding of myself? And so that's kind of like generally something that I've been interested in. But what we're doing here is a very visceral way of getting at that, like looking at the real time dynamics of how individuals behave relative to the crowds that they're inhabiting. I don't know. That's kind of a roundabout way of saying that I studied psych and then ended up in grad school. And so, yeah.
On my end, I've spent the most of my adult life like attending shows and just being the weird guy in the back, just kind of watching everything. And it's very interesting to see like how a DJ or like a musician or a band perform something, and then looking at the crowd and seeing just like the huge spectrum of reactions. Like some people dancing, some people standing still, some people having conversations. So just the dynamic and the relationship between the performer and the audience is what fascinates me.
If you extrapolate this idea out to like you've figured everything out, it's working perfectly. What do you see happening if you have this project working as good as you hope that it does?
So from my end, this would be kind of like phase 3 of the whole thing, and which would be integration. So ultimately, like having the audience's behavior dictate and optimize the show in real time.
How do you see that happening? Like you have all these cameras watching them, and as they're doing stuff, it like feeds data into some system that you have on stage, maybe like running in your laptop in Max or Touch Designer or something like that, and having that affect something in your system that you're using to perform music. Or
Yeah, probably something like that through the model that we train or through what we train.
So do you, like, if you got this tech working perfectly, it probably wouldn't just be limited to people at electronic music shows, right? Like you could put this in, you could license it to anywhere, like a coffee shop or a, whatever, a university or something, and it could perhaps like detect individuals who are emotionally out of sync with others and might pose a risk to others and stuff like that, which starts to sound a little bit like a Black Mirror plot. Because it's like people get like a ranking or something, and then all of a sudden the cops just arrest them without doing anything for like a thought crime or whatever. Do you think about this kind of stuff?
So what I'll say is things like this already exist and they're being used all the time. I think they are often designed for security purposes and surveillance. Like this is a thing that has already happened. I'm highly skeptical that anything that we create designed to detect crowd vibes, and if people are having a good time, if they're feeling inspired, if I don't see those easily translating into a context in which they could be used for malicious like surveillance purposes. But it is super Black Mirror. It's like we're installing cameras and watching people and like predicting their behavior. Like that's where it's the first place a lot of people's minds go when talking about this stuff. But I think like there's much more funding for those types of things than there are for these more creative outlets that like are like in support of human flourishing and expression. And so, I mean, that's one reason I think we're all pretty stoked to be here doing this, is like somebody's got to make the good application happen. And I don't mean to be like we're the gatekeepers of like the positive applications of technology like this. But yeah. And the scale at which we're studying crowds is different in the sense that we're less focused on the behaviors of any one individual in the crowd than we are the crowd itself as a thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other place my mind goes is that if you train this thing and all of a sudden it's able to predict behavior or emotional states from crowd dynamics, then it starts to raise questions about human agency and free will and stuff like that. It'd be interesting if it gets to that point where you're like, I already know the crowd's going to do this. And in that case, it's like, well, shit, do we? But I guess the way you're planning to do it is, or the way that you see it happening more so, is that you know how to trigger a crowd in a certain way by performing an action on your end first. Would that be correct to say? Or do you think that it might get to a point where some model that you train is able to predict crowd behavior?
It's similar to, like you mentioned a question of free will. And if we can tell what the crowd is going to do before it does. And I imagine, Bill and Kyle, that you guys already have this experience to some extent as performers. You go out night after night, and you know what's going to hit, and you probably, maybe you don't play these, but you know what's not as well. And that's a predictive model that you've developed through your own experience of observing crowds' behavior in response to light and sound over the course of many years, right? And the goal here is essentially to create a model that has a similar understanding, if you will, of the crowd.
Mm. Have you done any like, so you're going to start this calibration process next week. So I assume that you've kind of set this up in a small scale in a lab or in a room somewhere and like gotten some data from it. And so you know this is going to work on a bigger crowd. What did those tests look like?
Yeah, so we started with one camera, just on the hardware side, to test out a single module and make sure that like from a hardware perspective is working correctly, and then scaled up to 12, and then set those up in the social interaction lab at Dartmouth where Landry works, to make sure that the system was fully functional and deployable from the hardware side. In terms of the data extraction from the camera feeds, extracting things like the body posture of people, Landry and I both have significant, well, I shouldn't call it significant, but we both have prior experience working with machine learning models to extract human poses from like essentially the positions of someone's skeletal joints based on 2D or 3D video data. And this situation shouldn't differ much from that prior experience there. So we know as long as we have a reliable hardware setup that we should be able to extract like features of interest from these camera feeds.
You mentioned earlier at the start of the conversation that you worked with like body tracking technology in the past. What did that look like?
It actually started out with an augmented reality headset. Do y'all know the Magic Leap? Yeah. I had a Magic Leap. I got caught up in the hype with a Magic Leap. And and what that was essentially you can think of it like sunglasses that have screens on them. And inside of that, there was a camera that would scan one's environment in 3D. And then digital content could be projected on the glasses such that it looked like it was in the world in front of you. It was an early prototype of these sorts of devices for consumer applications. And I saw myself in the mirror with that one day, and saw it scanning my own body in 3D. And I got really curious about analyzing body movements and what one could create with that kind of data in real time. So that got me switched over to working with stereo cameras or depth sensors, things like the Xbox Kinect or the Intel RealSense, and eventually custom infrared-based, actually, stereo cameras that were set up in the dome for body tracking and controlling lights in a 360 lighting environment. And ultimately got excited about potentially controlling sound as well. And at that point, I found actually that wearable sensors were much more useful. So switched over to using IMUs, which are inertial measurement units. They're inside of them, they contain several sensors, an accelerometer, which measures acceleration, a gyrometer, which measures rotation, and a magnetometer, which is essentially a compass. And all of that information is collected at like extremely high fidelity. You can strap one of those onto a given body part, like a hand or your head or your feet, and the patterns in that data can be like any particular movement has characteristic patterns in that acceleration rotation data, and the computer can recognize those and trigger events, whether that be a strobe light or a kick drum, in real time. And that's my experience with body tracking.
Do you think I'm still unsure if like brain interfaces are ever going to really take off? They probably will at some point. People are fucking stupid. Like Neuralinks, or there's this other one that I saw last night, which is like some they're like, yeah, it's it's like a fifth the width of a human hair, and it's got like a ton of these like 5,000 electrodes on it, and it just sits on your brain, because apparently the Neuralink, like when the strands or whatever go into your brain, it leaves scarring and can cause brain damage, often causes brain damage. So there's this other company who made this like flat one that's like a super thin wafer that just has a ton of electrodes on it that just like sits on the brain. Then there was some other person who made one where they use a catheter and run it all the way up from like your taint to your brain stem or whatever, and it puts it in a blood vessel, and then it opens up like a stent in the blood vessel. All this crazy shit. Like I have no idea if this shit's going to take off, but like, let's say hypothetically we're in a world where that takes off. I feel like being able to read people's subjective experience like that for something like a show would be insane. You would immediately be able to tell if people are enjoying it or not based on their actual thoughts, I guess, or their brain activity more so than their body activity. Do you ever see this shit taken off, or?
Yeah, I don't know what form it will take. It seems to me like a non-invasive solutions, if possible, will be more likely to have popular.
That's what they were calling the catheter one, a non-invasive solution. I'm like, bro, you're fucking putting a hose up your taint all the way up to the back of your taint. Like, there's no way. It's like a fucking 1 meter long needle that they're putting through your body. That's not.
Hey man,
very invasive.
Feeling invaded it's subjective.
Yeah, it's subjective.
True.
Yeah, I think non-invasive solutions will probably be more likely to be used, but reading human state, as Landry said, can come in many different forms and modalities. Like, and there's a lot of information that can be extracted from skin temperature, from the activity of sweat glands on the skin, from heart rate, from and then from eye dilation, and many of these things can be measured even like remotely via cameras, as Landry was speaking to earlier. To the extent that will advance to the point where you can tell someone's precise emotional state from a stage-mounted camera, I'm not sure, but I do think that the technology is advancing very rapidly, and the ability to read people's emotions via devices is inevitably going to improve.
So these cameras you're using are powerful enough or high def enough to pick up eye dilation from people in the crowd?
Not the ones that we're currently deploying, no.
I wonder if the data would come back, like, if it could, in theory, pick up eye dilation, if it would immediately, like, write everyone off wearing sunglasses as a drug addict or something.
Possibly. Depends on the training data.
I have a random question not related to this at all for Michael, which is, I watched some video last night where apparently the James Webb Telescope found some, I don't know if it was a protein, it was something called like DXS or DMS or some shit like that. It's like a 3-letter acronym thing. And apparently this protein or whatever it is only gets created by living things. And the James Webb Telescope found it on a planet like 180 light years away or something. So they're like, there's definitely something over there, because this protein thing only gets created from living things. Do you know anything about this?
I don't know about the particular observation that you're referring to, but I can take a guess at what it means. So I started off by saying these proteins are really, really small, right? And they're difficult to see. So how could it be that the James Webb Telescope is seeing the smallest functional unit of life on a planet, like potentially, I don't know how many light years away?
Feels like 180 light years, like a pretty far away.
Yeah, and the way that they're inferring the presence of this molecule that they're saying is indicative of the presence or past presence of life is through light. So there's like the atmospheric contents of a planet determine which wavelengths of light, whenever the planet is hit by light from a star, which wavelengths of light it absorbs and which ones, say, get reflected, right? So there's a form of spectroscopy, and I guess the telescope is looking at the planet and seeing that there's some wavelengths of light that are being emitted that are indicative of the presence or sometimes the absence of a given molecule.
That's pretty insane. How do you even like accurately make a claim like that from light? Like they also said that they found this shit in the tail of a comet once, so maybe it's like not where, maybe this, whatever this protein thing or whatever it is, maybe it's not a protein, whatever this thing is that they found, like, doesn't potentially always indicate life, because if it's in the tail of a comet also, then it's probably no life on a comet.
Yeah, I'm not qualified to speak to the potential veracity of the claims, but I agree. It seems like it would be really hard.
Yeah, fair. Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate this chat. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think by the time this airs, like I mentioned already, we'll have completed the calibration sessions, and hopefully by this time we'll have whatever we found, or at least part of it, published on my website, infinityproblem.com. And then the last thing is moving into the next phase of this, if this works out, is the observation phase, which happens Mission Ballroom 3, so March 13th. So Mission Ballroom, March 13th of next year.
And wait, where are these calibration sessions happening? And you said sessions, so you're doing multiple shows, I guess?
Yeah. So we're doing 3 nights in Denver at Cervantes, other side.
Oh, interesting. Cool. Well, yeah, shit. I'm excited to see what comes of that. Definitely curious to chat after you've done some measurements so we can speculate more.
Yeah, once we've completed this and get kind of everything organized, we'd love to come back on and discuss what we found.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Bill.